Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another Cars Reading Skills workshop as part of the Jack Weston MCAT podcast. As always, I'm Molly, and I'm joined by Jack. Jack, it's so exciting! It's so exciting to have you back again for another passage.
Yeah, no, this is fun. I like the momentum we have here. I think we're learning a lot, and I hope students are enjoying this. Yeah, I'm excited for the next couple passages.
Me too. Yes. And so today's passage is called Translating Opera. And as usual, we will be going through this passage sentence by sentence to really give you guys what you would need to be pulling out if you were reading this on test day. As always, this is our Jack Weston daily passage for today, so May 5th. We will include the link to the passage in the caption of this video, whether you're listening to it on YouTube or Spotify or Apple Podcasts, so that if you would like to give the passage a try on your own first, or if you'd like to do the questions after you finish listening to our podcast, you will have the opportunity to do so. As always, all the material in our dailies are free. So we encourage you guys to check out the questions after we're done breaking down the passage. So, before we hop in with the actual content of the passage itself, Jack, I'd love to get your thoughts about what students should be prepared to learn from a passage like this.
The topic is very interesting. It's music, and
Mm,
what I've noticed is if you've played an instrument or you understand music or you've taken music classes, you tend to have an easier time reading such passages because
hmm
you have the confidence in knowing what they're specifically discussing. That could actually backfire because if you know too much, you may integrate your own assumptions, your own background knowledge into a passage that doesn't say those things, right? And doesn't suggest those things. So it could hurt you to some extent. In my
hmm
opinion, you should know that regardless of the passage topic, if you come in, you can find out what they really care about, what the MCAT, the people who make this exam, want you to take out of this passage. Sure, you
hmm
may not understand certain terminology when it's referencing music, right? But I don't think that is going to detrimentally affect your score. I think that you can ultimately score well, even if you don't understand all of the terms that they bring up, as long as you don't panic, and you don't, go and fall into this despair of, oh, I don't know what's going on. If you don't go
hmm
into that kind of mindset and you just stay confident and you just focus on the paragraph you have in front of you. What is
Yeah,
going on? What are they talking about? Okay, let's go to the next paragraph. And there will be a lot of sentences in this passage and future passages that we read together where it's not clear. It's not clear what they're talking about. As long as you're really focused and you're trying your best, you will find the right information that's going to help you answer the questions.
I love that. There's so much power in exactly what you just said of you don't have to be an expert in the material that they're talking about because that was something that scared me and I know it scares a lot of students. You don't have to be a musician. You don't have to be a literature major. You don't have to be an expert in ancient Greek architecture, right? Your job is to show up with the same skills that we talk about in this podcast and in our courses, right? And you analyze every passage the same way. So that's what we're going to demonstrate here today and in our other Cars Reading Skills Workshop episodes. If you haven't heard one before, definitely check it out. I think this is our fourth or fifth that we've done together, Jack. So students have lots of opportunities to go back and get additional passage practice. Um, okay, well, what do you think, Jack? Are you ready to hop in?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. Okay, so we'll start off with paragraph one, of course. And it says, before Wagner and Verdi in his middle years, no composer worried much about the opera's libretto, the words that the singers sing. And we have a semicolon, so we'll treat that like a period and we'll pause there to think, right? So we've got our first little portion of our very first sentence. And it sounds like what we're essentially setting up as our topic is, yes, music. And we're saying that early on, before these two people, right, no one seemed to care about the words, which again, as someone who loves music, I would be surprised by that. I love music. I love listening to the lyrics, but again, that doesn't matter right now. If they're telling us these early composers didn't care about the libretto or the lyrics, cool. That's what I care about, right? Focusing on what the author is claiming.
Yeah, yeah. So absolutely right. And the part that I think makes students a little anxious is opera, right? So they're specifically talking about operas. We have to consider that. Libretto, I don't even know what that is, but it tells it to you. It says what it is. It says the words that the singer sing. So typically the first sentence of the first of any passage you read, right? The very first sentence, very first paragraph is really, really important because it
Mhm,
establishes the theme of the passage. It establishes the topic of the passage. This passage is probably about opera. It's
mhm,
probably about words, right? Why else would the author bring this up in the very first sentence? It's probably the most important sentence of the entire passage. And I
mhm,
want students to read it carefully and make sure
mhm,
they understand the the context behind what they're about to discuss, right? And so, yeah, as long as you know this idea that early composers didn't care about opera lyrics, I would visualize that. Like I'm thinking about an opera, not that I'm a big fan by any means, but I'm thinking about, like one of these Italian operas or whatever, and I guess they just don't care about the words. It's more about the actual singing, right?
mhm.
I don't know about you, Molly, but I don't like music that I don't connect with lyrically.
Yeah. I don't always. I love listening to the lyrics. I think it adds, but there are songs that I can't understand the lyrics and then I'm basically tuning it out and I'm just listening to the beat and the sound of the voice. And I actually do sometimes really like music that I don't understand. Um because you're not cluing into the actual meaning. You're just so focused on how it sounds. It's like if you're blindfolded, right? You pay more attention to what you can hear. I almost feel like it's kind of similar for that situation. Um, Not that it matters for this passage, but I feel like it's an interesting idea that they're bringing in. The
Yeah,
lyrics don't matter as much as the music themselves
yeah,
or
I
itself,
would I would disagree, right? Like I mean, not with this with what the author is saying. I mean, I'm
but
sure.
personally,
Yeah, yeah. Personally, I love the lyrics, and I cannot connect with music unless I
yeah,
lyrically. But sometimes you're right. Like if I don't understand the lyrics of a song, I might just make it up in my head. Like whatever I
I
want.
like that.
But okay, cool. So in this case, the author is making a claim, a very bold claim. In some ways, it's historical because we don't really know. It, we can never go into composers' minds and really know for a certain whether it's today or back then if they actually cared about an opera's words.
Yeah.
We like this is too subjective. This is nothing we cannot factually ever determine this, right?
Hmm.
Ever. Like that's how I know it's important. When the author talks about something that we cannot factually measure, right?
Hmm.
Like and even measuring things could be debatable because of the way we measure it, right? Or what we measure. This seems like an argument, a claim, right? And
Hmm.
that's really important. So there are a couple things that are important that we just got out of this first sentence, believe it or not. One, it's the most important sentence of the passage, okay?
Hmm.
Because it establishes what we're talking about. Two, there is actually an argument in this sentence, and not there aren't always arguments in the first sentence of the first paragraph, right? But there
Hmm.
happen to be in this sentence. And this argument is really specific, and we have to really understand it at a deeper level, right? We're talking about opera, we're talking about composers before Wagner and Verdi, we're talking about lyrics, right? We have to really internalize that. We have to really understand that at a deeper level. What I notice with our students in our courses, is that when they read, they're kind of mindlessly reading, right? And they're not really intentionally reading, trying to really understand. And I understand why. The nervousness of the test looms, comes in, the
Hmm.
panic, the anxiety of the timer, the fact that you're being graded. I understand where you're coming from, but if you've decided to take this test, you are telling the people who are making this test that you're going to read it and pay attention, right? And so you have
Mhm.
to practice that, and that's what we're doing here. So great, let's continue. Let's see what happens.
Cool. All right. So again, we stopped at the semicolon with the first portion of this sentence. So let's round it out. It says they took what they were given and did the best they could with it. So presumably what they're meaning with what they were given and what it is, right? It's probably the lyrics. Again, they took the lyrics that were given to them or the libretto and they just sang the song, right? They made the music good, even if the lyrics weren't as good. Kind of
That's
rounds out the picture that we talked about.
Yeah, that's interesting because it basically suggests that the composer doesn't actually worry about the lyrics at all, like we said, right? They're not really in charge of the lyrics, they're in charge of the music. So whatever they're given, they're probably given something. They're like, okay, let's make some music around these lyrics, right? Which is odd because if you think about like current artists, well, not all of them, but a lot, the good ones, they usually write their own songs, they write their own lyrics, they write their own music, the music around it. So okay, it's just interesting and continues with what we've talked about.
Sweet. Let's look at our second sentence. It says this was possible because a satisfactory convention had been established as to the styles and forms in which libretti should be written, which any competent versifier could master. Okay. I'm reading this and I get like this was possible because so it sounds like they're just explaining how this could happen, but there's a lot of terms in here that I see that go over my head. I don't know what a versifier is. I don't know. Libretti probably means the libretto, the lyrics, but this sentence as a whole, I think, is a lot harder to understand than that first one. I'm assuming, again, because I see this as possible, because that we're explaining this idea that came before, right? That again, lyrics didn't matter to these composers, but this sentence, I think, would be a lot harder for most students to understand.
Oh yeah, we can make a choice. We can either decide to stick to what we already know, right, and not be phased by this sentence,
Hmm.
and try our best to understand it, right, but continue on with the hope that that is what we already have is enough, right, which is what it probably is enough, right, to get through this paragraph.
Hmm.
Or we could read this sentence, huff and puff, right, and decide that this is too hard. I have to read it all over again.
Hmm.
Or we can huff and puff and just
Love
decide we're
that.
not going to do this passage. We're going to skip to this passage and go to another passage, right? We
Hmm.
all have three choices. Which choice are you going to make, right? And so you have to understand no one is perfectly understanding this. No one. 99% of the population that reads this is going to have a really hard time reading this sentence.
Yeah.
It's not you, it's them. Okay. I don't
Hmm.
know when this was written. Probably, sometime in the early 20th century, I'm gonna guess, maybe mid 20th century, so like 70, 80 years ago. Who knows, right? Maybe 100 years ago. Like this is not typical English that we speak today, right? About well, this sort of is, but this is not something that we normally read. And so I
Hmm.
wouldn't worry too much about it. The MCAT realizes this, right? And I would just keep going. Okay.
I love that. Okay, so coming out of that more intense sentence, we see this meant, however, that while a composer could be assured of getting a settable text, one libretto was remarkably like another. Okay, so again, settable text, maybe we know what that is, maybe we don't. It sounds like music terminology that personally, as someone who is a scientist and not a musician, I don't know. What they are communicating, though, is one libretto, which is a lyric, was remarkably like another. That little phrase of that sentence is very clear, right? The lyrics are similar. And we know we're saying the lyrics didn't matter as much, right? Now we're saying that they're similar to one another, which is valid, right? Okay, maybe this is trying to explain why they didn't care. I don't know, but that is one piece of this little sentence fragment that I can pull out.
I
Again,
love
we're stopping at the semicolon, so we'll finish up the sentence in a sec.
I love that. I love how you're like, okay, I don't understand. Maybe I don't get the whole thing, but I get this one part because it's really clear.
Hmm.
The really clear things are the really important things. Okay,
Yeah.
I want to write that down. If it's
Yeah.
super clear, it's super important, and that's what we're fishing. We're fishing for those clear sentences that make things make sense, and so that this is pretty obvious. It goes in line with what we're talking about. They don't care. They didn't care, right? And
Mhm.
the lyrics were similar. It's a different argument, right? We've never talked about how similar they are to one another. But
Mhm.
if they didn't care, then they wouldn't distinguish them, right? They would be pretty similar, right? We don't, so in this case, it's consistent and it's just
Mhm.
a more of an addition of what we've been discussing. Okay?
Yeah. And I love that tagline, by the way. What is more clear is more important.
Right.
Right. Okay, let's finish up that last sentence. It says, all originality and interest had to come from the music. Again, in thinking of what is clear being more important, that is very clear, right? The originality comes from the music, it doesn't come from the lyrics. No one cares about it. And now we understand why, right? The music itself was where the originality came in.
Right, right. So when we finish reading this paragraph, we can do two things. We can either generalize the whole thing and say, oh, they didn't care about lyrics, which is fine. Okay, that'll get you to like a 127 on cars. Okay.
Hmm.
But if you really want to get like a 130 or 131 or 132 on cars, right? Specifically, the difference is you're more specific with what you summarize. So what you should really know is yes, they didn't care about the lyrics, the libretto, okay? But they also thought that the author also thought the lyrics were similar and that originality had to come from the music. Right?
Hmm.
It's more specific for the arguments that were discussed because we could argue whether or not they were similar. We could argue whether or not all originality, that's kind of extreme, all originality came from the music, right? And so
Hmm.
that's the way you want to read and keep track of things if you want to score really high. If you want to get like a 130, 131, then you would pinpoint and understand those arguments at that level, right? And not just kind of generalize things too much. Generalizing
Yeah.
is fine, but to an extent, right? And
Mhm.
so great. Okay.
Nice. Okay, so now that we have a good idea of what's going on in paragraph one, we can look at paragraph two. It says, today it is foolish to pretend that we can listen to a Mozart opera with the ears of his contemporaries, as if we had never heard of the operas of Wagner, the late Verdi, and Strauss, in which the libretto plays an important role. So it sounds like presumably Mozart comes before Wagner and Verdi, who we know they maybe had something to do with this change, right? Now libretto, the lyrics have an important role. Basically, it sounds like today we care about the lyrics. We didn't used to, and that changes the way we listen to music.
Yeah, definitely alluding to this idea that things have maybe changed, right? Not so
Mhm.
clear. It is foolish to pretend we can listen to a Mozart opera with the ears of his contemporary. So we didn't think about music in that way back then as we do today, right? That's
Yeah.
the vibe we get. And so
Mhm.
knowing the differences between these people, I don't think is the key. I think the key is understanding the message, right? And this message is not that clear. I'm gonna make that like it's not the most important message or argument or opinion. It's not clear what they're saying, but it's in line with what we're talking about. I will continue.
Cool. So, in listening to a Mozart opera, we cannot help noticing when the text is banal or silly, or becoming impatient when a line is repeated over and over again. Again, it kind of seems a little more clear now. We do care about the lyrics now. We care. We can't help noticing when the lyrics are silly, right? Maybe we're paying closer attention to it now than we did before.
Right. If you were, around when Mozart had operas or the Mozart operas, right, you wouldn't notice these words repeating over and over again. But now
Mhm.
we do. Why? Because of Wagner and Verdi. right?
Mhm.
Because of those people that did care about the words, we now can listen to Mozart, right, and realize, oh wow, this is pretty, you know, kind of like silly or, kind of repetitive. Okay.
Mhm.
All right.
Okay.
Good.
All right, one last sentence of paragraph two. It says, having the beautiful music in his ears, a modern translator of an opera into English must feel it is his duty to make improvements to an opera's lyrics so that they match the majesty of an opera's music. Okay, I feel like we were kind of building to this point throughout the paragraph. We're basically saying now that these translators must improve the lyrics. And I feel like the author's not shying away from making like stronger claims in this passage, right? And they're saying these translators must do it. They must feel that it's their duty to do this. You need to improve the lyrics. You must, right? So that jumps out to me as an argument for sure.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, this is crazy. Like we're translating, right, works of other people, and we're saying,
Hmm.
oh, their lyrics are so bad
Yeah,
compared to music. We need
I
to make it
have to
better.
fix it.
That's like someone like 200 years from now coming back and listening to, I don't know, David
Yeah.
Guetta, or like I don't know, someone that music wise is awesome, but lyrically maybe it's not so great. Let's translate it
Yeah,
and
let's fix that.
let's fix that, you know. And so in this case, yeah, so that's exactly what's going on, and the author is making this bold claim that they have to do it, right?
Mhm.
So yeah, okay, sounds good. I mean, I hope everyone understands what they're saying, right? Translators of opera must make the words as good as the music. So they're literally changing it from like English to French or French to like Italian. And in doing so, right? I don't know if there's English operas, but whatever. You're you're basically changing the words. Like it's a totally different opera if you think about it, right? Different way of explaining the music. So
Yeah.
okay, sounds good. I mean that is definitely the point that is the clearest in this paragraph, and it's something that we have to understand and know. Even you may
Yeah.
disagree. If you're a musical person, you may go, wait a second, why are we changing the lyrics? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you agree or disagree with whether or not the author's points are valid, right? You
Yeah.
you have to know the author's point. The author's point is translators must do this, right? Because the
Mhm.
music is so much better than the words, right? And this is the issue I see with a lot of ESL students. So if you're ESL, I'm not trying to. I want you to understand that you have to identify this problem, okay? When you're reading, you have to really internalize the argument at a deeper level and really understand it. Don't just read it like a newspaper and not fully grasp what's going on. The best way, and this applies to everyone, but I've noticed ESL students struggle with this more. The best way to overcome this issue is to pause, reflect, visualize, imagine what this actually looks like. Imagine someone sitting there listening to this opera and literally changing the words of the opera word by word as they're translating it, right? Like literally see that in your head, because when you do, you can't unsee it, and you understand it at the level the author expects you to, right? And so yeah, okay, sounds good. Let's keep going.
Cool. So, paragraph three, right? It says, in such a situation, arias, which we've got a little break here, long solos sung with few words, present a special set of challenges. So, okay, it sounds like in such a situation, we're saying like in this same vein, right? The same idea as came before, arias are challenging, right?
Yeah, yeah, go ahead. Anything,
That seems like all we're really learning so far.
yeah, it's funny because before this passage, I would have had no idea what a libretto or an arias is. I'm not a
Mhm.
musical, right? So I'm
Mhm.
hoping I can meet an opera person one day and
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 impress
use
them
my
with your knowledge.
and use my new lingo, right? And so don't panic if you don't know what arias is. It doesn't matter, right? They're literally telling you. It says long solos. I'm thinking of, I don't know if you've seen that movie Fifth Element with Bruce Willis. I'm just thinking about that opera singer in that movie. I don't know if anyone, it's a kind of older movie, but it was a really funny, entertaining movie. But in this case, just visualize whatever you see, like a long solo, like someone just singing. And don't make me sing here, Molly, but long,
That'll be for the next episode.
you're right, a long solo, just singing for a couple of words, right? Prolonging the word. Okay, great. All right. But it does say there are challenges when we translate this to some extent, right? Okay.
Mhm.
All right. Let's keep going.
All right. And I'm going to remind you next episode, you're going to sing for us, Jack.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. An aria very rarely contains information which it is essential for the audience to know in order to understand the action, and which must therefore be translated literally. Okay, so they've got this negative in here. We're saying the arias don't have any of these things. They don't have critical information, right? So if you had critical information, you had to be translated literally, but an aria doesn't. So again, they've got challenges associated with translating arias, right? Sounds like it's mostly just like a musical part where they prolong the words. Um, but again, they don't have any critical information in them or in those
Yeah.
words.
Yeah, so they just have to be translated like as it's said, right? So they
Mhm.
can't really improve on that. That I don't it's not really clear what they're trying to get at. I mean, that sentence is kind of weird and not easy to understand. As long as you know arias are challenging, you're probably in a good position here.
Yeah,
Okay, challenging to translate specifically. Okay?
I like it. Okay, and that was a semicolon, which again we treat like periods. So we'll look at the latter half of the sentence. It says, "All that a translation of an aria must do is convey the emotion or conflict of emotions which it expresses." Okay, again, this I feel like makes it a lot more clear, right? Arias are challenging for translation because ultimately the emotion is what matters, right? The lyrics don't matter as much for an aria. They just have to convey the emotion, um, which I think is much more clear than the piece about it not containing essential information and the translation is hard. I think that makes it a good deal of sense. They have to
Yeah.
convey emotion.
And how is that emotion conveyed? And they're not saying it directly, but we can assume it's through the music or the lyrics.
It sounds like they're saying the music because it's
Probably.
saying the lyric portion is pretty small, right? There's only a couple words in these things. Long solos, few words. Sounds like it's more the music.
Right. This is an interesting paragraph because it seems like an offshoot, right? A very random thing. I'm curious if they bring up arias again in the next couple paragraphs, but if they don't, and this is the only time we see it, we know that if we get a question about arias, we have to remember this point that arias are challenging to translate, right?
Mhm.
And it's specifically in this paragraph because they love those kinds of questions. If you come to one of our free trial sessions, which we host every week, myself or one of our team members will discuss this. This is part of our strategy, of part of our course is understanding what is narrow, what is local to one paragraph versus what is more general, right? Because
Mhm.
those are repeating themes. Like the general things are repeating themes, and it kind of goes into the whole we have to translate things and make it better, but we can't do it for aria specifically. So sort of an extension of the last paragraph, but it does include new information, new arguments, specifically about arias. And so we have to be able to understand the structure of this passage and how they bring up things and what is important and what is brought up in only one paragraph, right? And so usually the important things are brought up multiple times over and over again. Okay, let's keep going.
Okay, so paragraph 4 says, at the same time, the arias, so they are bringing it up again, the arias in an opera are, as a rule, its high points musically, so that it is in them that the quality of the translation matters most. Ooh, okay. So, our last paragraph, we said that translating arias is challenging. Here we're saying this is when the translation is most important, right? And it's because it's the high point musically, right? So it's the most important point musically, so we care about the lyrics, but coming from paragraph 3, the lyrical translation is tough. So we're kind of
Right.
we're starting off with a maybe a potential problem with what we've already said. I'm excited to see this one play out.
Yeah, but you know what's interesting is in the last paragraph, we were kind of alluding to the idea that, oh, there aren't that many lyrics, so it's not important.
Yeah.
Actually, it's really important because the music is really important at this stage, right?
Hmm.
The author is trying to establish, okay, this is a really challenging thing to translate simply because it's, you have to you have to go more literal to some extent, but really because the music is really important at this stage, right? So it's important to do this properly, right? And you have to
Yeah.
translate it well, right? Okay, let's keep going.
Okay, so far as an original librettist, which again means lyric, is concerned, all that matters are that his verses should inspire the composer to write beautiful music, but the translator is in a different position. So again, the original librettist, the original composer didn't really care. They just cared about the music, but the translator is now tasked with fixing this. So it seems like this sentence is just kind of driving home that the translation matters. A
Yeah,
little more difficult to understand, but the translation matters is what I would take from a sentence like this.
right, right. Okay.
Okay. For the translator, the aria is like the opera in general. Okay, that's a very clear or very simple sentence, but I'm not exactly sure what you're trying to get at here. The aria is like the opera in general. The opera is important, so the aria is important. Is that what you're trying to say?
Very, very, very vague,
It's
right?
very vague. Yeah.
Simple sentence, but a vague sentence, right?
Yeah,
So I would
exactly.
continue reading to see where the author is going with this, because
Yeah,
we can guess and we can bring in our own outside knowledge or what we think is best, but it's not. Don't do that, right? Just keep going until the context is clear. Okay.
perfect. One more sentence in paragraph number 4. It says, the music is already there, and it is his duty to make the verses as worthy of it as he can. So I feel like it's important whenever you see just his and he to remember that that's going to refer to the most recent subject, right? Which in the last sentence, we're talking about the translator. So we're saying the music's already there when the translator is working. The translator has to make the lyrics worthy of the music. That to me sounds pretty similar to what we've talked about in the past.
Yeah, yeah, that argument that came up in the second paragraph, right? Which is
Mhm.
translator of opera must make words, as good as the music, right? They
Exactly.
have to translate it well. Right?
Hmm.
So that's why they brought up arias because it's a specific instance where a translator is challenged, right? And the author is trying to make it seem like a translator's job is difficult and it's valuable,
Yeah.
right? And it's important.
Hmm.
That's what I'm getting. I've already established the main idea, right? If you ask me right now, what's the main idea? I'd say it's a translator of opera has to make the lyrics as good as the music, right?
Hmm.
That's the argument because I've seen that in like multiple paragraphs. It's came up in the second paragraph, uh, fully fleshed out, right? Really clear, and then it goes into some example of arias, and it reestablishes the importance in the fourth paragraph, right?
Yeah.
And so I love the structure of this passage. It difficult passages typically have less arguments to focus on, but the arguments are clearer and they're usually very important for the questions. And so yeah, this is where I'm going to start reading a lot faster because
Mhm.
I got it. I get it. There's something happens in me where it's like, okay, it clicks. I get it. Let's go on. I won't assume I know everything. I'm not gonna just skim, but I'm more confident now. I don't have to be as cautious, right? I get the point the author's making. That's going to be profound when we get to the questions. Okay?
Yeah. Yeah, you know the author already, and that's the whole point of cars is get to know the author.
Right. Right.
Love it. Okay, well, let's start paragraph number 5. And again, this is semicolons. We'll stop at it. When one compares English poetry with Italian or that of any Romance language, one sees that English poetic speech is more concrete in its expressions. Okay, so that last portion of the sentence is pretty clear. English poetry or poetic speech is concrete. I I understand what you're telling me. I don't know exactly what you mean by concrete. Maybe like tangible, like you could touch it. I don't know. That I will wait until I hear more from the author, but at least that last piece of the sentence is more clear. English poetic speech is concrete, and that's different from another Romance language.
Yeah, I don't know what concrete means in this case. And if you're thinking I don't know that word in this context, don't worry. You could
Yeah.
probably guess. Concrete means probably, like concrete is hard, right? You could stand on it. It isn't you're not shaking on concrete, right? You're not like slipping on concrete. Um,
Hmm.
so maybe it's clear, it's solid, right? But
I
again,
like that.
we don't know. Let's keep going. Let's see where the author is going with this.
Okay, so it says an English poet writing a love lyric tends to express his feelings in terms of imagery and metaphors drawn from nature, as in, quote, my love is like a red, red rose, end quote, rather than stating them directly. So it sounds like you're right. Concrete is like solid, right? We're rather than just saying I love you, I'm saying my love is like a rose, which is concrete. It's tangible. It's physically here. It's natural, right? If we're drawing them from nature.
Yeah, yeah, concrete means it's tangible. That's the context here, right? That's the definition because the definition is totally dependent on the author's context. And so,
Hmm.
yeah, great. Okay.
Cool. So further, English and Italian notions of what it is proper for an amorous male to say and do are different. So it sounds like we're kind of adding another point in here with further, but I'm kind of interested to see what the author's going to do with this. Sounds like they're saying like what is okay for a person to do or how they should behave is different like social norms. I don't know. That's different from just how we're talking. Um, so I'm excited to see what they do with that, if anything.
Right. I think the word that bothers a lot of students is amorous because
Amorous, yeah,
that's not a word we use every day, right?
yeah,
But we know enough. We're fine, right? We know we're talking about like this guy who's in love, right? So that's probably what amorous male means. It's someone who's in love, right?
Mhm.
And so just keep going with that context, right? Let's go. Let's keep going.
Okay, last sentence of paragraph number 5. To an English sensibility, Ottavio's exclusive concentration upon himself in Mozart's Don Giovanni, his beloved mustn't be unhappy because it makes him unhappy, is a bit distasteful. So it sounds like, again, we were talking about what it's okay to say and do is different. In English, it wouldn't be okay to say you're not allowed to be unhappy because it makes me unhappy. Um, sounds like maybe, again, like norms of love are different, but I also think it really ties back to what we talked about before. English speech is different. It's more concrete, right? It's more solid. So I think ultimately this is more than anything an extension of what has come before. Um, it's saying that in different languages, how concrete it is matters and it can create differences.
That's it. Yeah. I mean, we're just talking about translation, right? English poetic speech is more concrete. And the author's kind of giving us an example with this red, red rose. I wouldn't say that's a really strong example.
Yeah.
But exactly. So to an English person who knows English, Octavio's whatever Mozart's composition isn't good because it's not concrete, right? That's what it's saying. So we can assume Mozart's Don Giovanni is not concrete,
Yeah.
right? Based on what we're saying. If you had a hard time reading this paragraph, you're not alone. As
Yeah.
long as you caught that clear sentence and you had an idea of what concrete meant, which is, this tangible thing that we can like express through things, right? Like roses, etc., then I think you're good for this paragraph. You're going to be fine, right?
Yeah.
This comes back to what we talked about last week, which is really 10, 15% of the passage really matters, right? Those really clear sentences. Okay?
Yeah. All right, let's see our final paragraph, paragraph 6. So, Ottavio's aria contains a number of high notes, long runs, and phrases which repeat like an echo. Cool. So, we're continuing to talk about Ottavio from the previous paragraph, and then we're also bringing back arias. That being said, this is not really an argument, it's just describing the music. So, I'd read that and say, cool. Where's the argument here?
All right, sounds good.
All right, let's look at our next sentence. It says, any English version, therefore, must provide open vowels for the high notes and runs and phrases which can sound like echoes. As soon as I read the must there, I'm like, ooh, we're going to make a comment about translation. But and it kind of is. It's talking about making an English version, but it's still not quite concrete enough for me, right? Like it's we haven't really hit on that point yet. I'm still left waiting in this sentence. I would read on to the next one.
Yeah, exactly. Don't panic. Just keep going. That's part of the process. Great.
Okay, there is a certain kind of English poetry which is based upon the repetition of a word or words in slightly different context. For instance, Dawn's the expiation. Okay. I'm still kind of at the edge of my seat. We're talking about English poetry, which was something we brought in the last paragraph. I don't really have anything significant enough in the sentence to be sure of where we're going yet. At this point, I feel like students are maybe panicking a little bit. Like, did I miss something? Should I go back and reread?
Yeah, it's intimidating,
It's
right?
intimidating.
This is the key is if you can face your fears and your worries and you can believe in yourself and you can continue, something is about to click. Something should click. Maybe it won't click every paragraph because every paragraph's not important, but I assure you that you have the reading skills to read these passages. You just have to practice enough. And I think Molly, myself and yourself have been doing this for such a long time, and so many passages that we know we can figure out easily what sentences are clear relative to others. And
Hmm.
because we've been able to do this for a while, we know nothing in this paragraph so far is clear, right? And so
Hmm.
I think that's kind of assuring, right? Like over time, you can build that ability to sense what is really clear and what not isn't. And take our word for it. This is not clear. This is
Yeah.
not easy to read, right? Let's keep reading. Let's see if the last sentence makes it any easier.
Yeah, one last sentence of the whole passage says the aria is one of the most beautiful which Mozart ever wrote, but the words of are of an appalling banality and make Donna Anna very unsympathetic, now leading poor Don Ottavio on, now repulsing him. So I feel like this sentence clarifies things a little bit, right? We're saying the aria is the most, or one of the most beautiful, right? This aria has beautiful music, but the lyrics stink, right? The lyrics are awful. They've got this appalling banality, and they're basically changing the way the music is heard, right? It's changing the way that we see the people that are singing it, making them repulsive. So again, I think this is enough from, being on the edge of my seat for the whole paragraph so far. This feels enough like what we've talked about in the past that I'm like, okay, cool, right? We're basically saying the same thing that we had mentioned before, right? Which is that yeah, Oreos have the great music. The lyrics are really important to translate. And right, that's kind of the key that I'm getting from this.
Yeah, repeating themes, right? Arias are important. That seems a little bit more specific, but what really comes across is early composers didn't care about the opera lyrics, brought that up in the first paragraph, right?
Mm,
And also that, translators have a duty to make it better, right? Banality just means unoriginal or just kind of boring.
yeah.
And so it kind of fits in with what we've been talking about in terms of lyrics, right? The words, the lyrics are boring or unoriginal. The whole Donna Anna, very unsympathetic. That's probably the character in the opera, right?
Hmm.
That's singing this with those words. And if you actually pay attention to the words, Donna Anna, it doesn't sound like she's really sympathetic, right? It doesn't sound like she's
Mm,
really heartfelt.
mhm.
But again, the music is the best, right? It's the
Yeah.
most beautiful music Mozart ever wrote. And so the author has this like dichotomy, this dilemma, right? Where at one point, the music is amazing, but then the lyrics suck. So the author's trying to resolve that by suggesting that translators must do this. They must fix these lyrics because they suck.
Yeah.
Right? And,
Yes.
so that's the idea here that we really need to know as we go to the questions. And if you have that concept, that message in your brain as you read these questions, you're going to be fine.
Yeah. And you could test that yourself, right? Now that we've reached the end of our passage, we know what's important from each paragraph. And as you've so nicely summed up for us, Jack, we know our main idea. Now it's your chance to, once the podcast is over, pull up the link that's included in the caption and give these questions a try. See how you do, right? And again, when you're reviewing those questions, you want to be reflecting back on the way that you read the passage. Is there anything I could do better next time? Is there anything that I missed the first time around? Probably not because you've heard the podcast, but that's the way that you're going to build this intuitive understanding of cars that Jack, you so naturally have, or you've built, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you want to see how we approach questions, if you want to see how we, read passages in a more technical way, because this is more of a reading comprehension episode, right? Podcast where we're just trying to help students understand how to read these passages. If you want a more in-depth understanding of how to identify the key arguments and how to find support and all that, join our live sessions, join one of our free sessions or
Yes.
even get free access to our course by speaking to one of our advisors. They're happy to introduce you to our course and show it to you. But this is a really good starting point where you can start practicing reading and understanding what you're reading, without panicking, without getting nervous about it. So yeah, I love it. I think it's a great way to start.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode of our Cars Reading Skills workshops. If you haven't listened to these before, definitely go back and check out the others that we've posted already. We always try and get a variety of different passages in front of you guys as part of these episodes. So go check out our others and stay tuned for our next one. We hope to see you there. And until then, happy studying.